Hi, I'm Kristen Brandt, and today we're going to be talking about density and land use. Have you ever been to a big city and felt really crowded? Or how about you've been to a rural area and you're like, where is everyone? Well, that's what we kind of want to dig into today. We want to take a look at those low, medium, and high density characteristics and how they represent different patterns of that residential land use. So, what are we going to learn? Well, before we can really dig into that, we need to just kind of reflect on some population density again. And so, this is taking a look at population density by city from 2011 to 2014. Now, the cities that you see at the top of this graph here, what we're going to really kind of hold off to is until 6.10 when we look at squatter settlements and we look at the pressures that they're placing on the city because of just how densely populated they are, in particular the periphery and semi-periphery. Today is where we're really going to focus a little more on looking at Europe and North America and those land use patterns that we see in probably more of our core countries. And why is that? Well, some things that we really talk about, and you've seen this before, is that bid rent theory, right? So we talk about land cost based on distance, based on the central business district. And if you recall, we've talked about this in our agriculture unit, and we also talking about it again here in our urban unit, because the closer you are to the central business district, the more expensive the land is. The further you move away, the more affordable the land is. Well, part of that is because of the resources that are available and accessibility to those goods and services. You also have seen when we talk about the concentric zone model, Burgess's model, what we talked about here is that as cities grew, they expanded outward. And the theory was that they expanded outward in this concentric, in this circular movement away from that central business district. The theory then connected to the bid rent is that those layers are going to get more expensive the closer you get to the central business district. Well, what does that mean for residential and home use? So let's look. Because it's more expensive and because we're trying to capitalize on the goods and services in that central business district, we're going to see things more densely populated. When it's more densely populated, we tend to build up. And so that's your image on the left, right? If I put more people in this area and I put it and we build up, it means we can kind of all contribute to the cost of that piece of land. Now, Europe's a little bit unique because most of the cities in Europe, there are height restrictions about how tall we can build our buildings. And so you're going to notice still the tight packed, look at how close the buildings are here together. This one's actually in Paris. And then we will see multiple layers, but you're not going to see the same high rises that you're going to see in a New York City, for example. That being said, we also can see that it's not always high rises in North America as well. So the image on the right, what you're going to see here is part of Chicago, Old Town, Gold Coast. So notice though, we've got kind of that mix together, but how closely packed those buildings are. The image on the left, maybe I like to point out because my husband actually built the one with the blue windows there. That's 340 on the park, overlooking Millennium Park. But what's really interesting when we start looking at this is that we get into future units when we're talking about mixed use, is how we're kind of incorporated right in that commercial district and how we're trying to maximize every little piece of land to try and bring people to those urban areas. That being said, as we start to slowly move out from the central business district, we start to see a little more space in those medium density areas. And what you'll start to see, take a look, you're going to see some yards and you're going to see garages. So take a look in the distance down here in Chicago. You'll see Chicago in the background. And then we see the garages along, a lot of times here in the back of the homes, and so a little yard in between. You'll see kind of a parkway here on the image to the left. And so that idea of starting to see more single family detached homes with a little bit of a yard. Still feels pretty tight. That's why we're saying it's medium density. We will see a little bit more space in the suburbs. You're going to start to see sometimes a little bit bigger yard, and we'll see other services that are available. But what you start to feel, though, is kind of those patterns developing even in the medium density areas. In the low density areas, you really start to feel that space. And so we go back to even looking at our agriculture unit, talking about dispersed versus clustered villages. If we start to think about access to that, even those small towns and those communication areas, that there still feels like there's a lot of open space, and there's a lot of movement for people. How does this all connect? Well, a lot of this connects to our access to services. And so and how it's changed over time, but also location. And so, those little downtowns that used to be kind of even how a lot of our urban areas were set up. Now, probably more of our rural areas, that's kind of that center point, that hub. It's where you can get a lot of the things that you need for your household. But things then shifted over time into more of that mall, right? We saw this in 6.4, this image, when we started talking about people, it needs a little higher threshold. In other words, the number of people to support it, people are willing to drive a little bit further. But ultimately, we start shifting to these big box stores where we start to see them scattered across the United States in particular, so that people don't have to drive quite as far to get to some of those services. I point that out only because as these things continue to change over time, we know that technology has changed all of this even more drastically. That do we necessarily need all of those? Because I can shop right now on my computer. Maybe I will need to do a little shopping later. But out of all seriousness, that's going to start to shift how we have our businesses and what's offered at those small or low, medium, and high density areas. When we talk about practice, take a look at the image up at the top. That's really kind of looking at this bid rent or land rent theory. And so we see that these multi-story apartments, really, we see that high density closer to the central business district, right? We're trying to capitalize on many people helping to pay for that piece of land. As we move out to the suburbs, we see more space, lower density, yards, garages, parks, a lot more open areas. And so the question is that use of land rent to explain the residential population density. So if I look at the population pyramid on the left that you learned about in Unit 2, we see probably more of a younger generation in that multi-story central business district area. And when we shift to Y, you start to see more kids and you're going to see more families, because this is where then there's more space. And we tend to see that this is when they shift out to those suburbs. So what is it I want you to take away? Ultimately, it's that idea of looking for those patterns. High density, closer to the central business district, medium density as I move away, and then the low density the further I get. What services are there? We start to take a look at the amount of population and what it can support. And so I would remind you to go back and look at 6.4 video 2, because that'll really talk about range and threshold and those types of services you might see in these different areas. I want to thank you for joining us today as we talked about density.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ms. Cosgrove, and I'm coming to you from Miami, Florida today. We are going to talk about infrastructure, and we're going to talk about how location and quality of a city's infrastructure can really affect its patterns of economic and social development. So, what are some of the things that we will learn? Well, first of all, when we mention infrastructure, some of the things that we talk about are communication systems, our transportation like roads, highways, public transportation, airports, ports, railway hubs, our educational systems, so schools, universities, water and sewage systems, and our electric grids. So these are all things that we talk about when we mention infrastructure. And local politics, society, and even the environment will really have a big impact on it. If you think about the United States, infrastructure in the United States is aging. We have roads and bridges that will need constant updating, access to safe drinking water, our sewage systems, these all need upgrading. So, who is going to pay to build and maintain that infrastructure that is needed? Where will these new developments be built? State, local governments, and communities, they must all come to an agreement on how to work all of this out. Areas with the best infrastructure will see the most economic development. So let's look at an example. Here we have an image of traffic congestion in Mexico City. And so you see all of these cars, it's in a mixed use neighborhood. So you have commercial and you have residential, and like, boy, is that crowded. So, how many registered vehicles do you think there are in Mexico City? There are over 20 million people in Mexico City and the surrounding area. Many people have cars. Can the roads accommodate them? And as people keep moving to Mexico City and its surrounding area, what is that impact going to be on the infrastructure? Not just the roads, but also the water supply, the sewage systems, and every other part of infrastructure that makes up a city. So let's look at what some areas of Mexico City are doing to combat some of this traffic congestion. They're traveling by aerial trams. And so these aerial trams, which it's kind of like a gondola in the air, they help link poor communities living on the outskirts of Mexico City to the jobs, opportunities, and economic life that's a little bit closer in. These aerial trams are actually safer than the public transportation, the public buses, and it's also a lot faster getting into the city. What might take on a public bus several hours, on the tram, it could take just 1 hour. So some cities are using alternative methods to combat traffic congestion. If we look at these two images, one is of roadways and the other one is all of the infrastructure in a city. We know that the quality and access to good transportation and to connectivity will really make a difference. So, for example, can you imagine if you had bad Wi-Fi connectivity? Maybe you do. If a business is going to come into a city, they're going to be looking for really good connectivity. They are going to be looking for good transportation infrastructure, not only for the economic part of its business, but also for its employees. So quality and access to transportation and connectivity really makes a difference. And who wants slow Wi-Fi? So we know that healthcare services, whether it's hospitals or access to clinics, access to doctors and nurses, cultural and entertainment options, our transportation connections, again, our broadband and internet availability. We know that these are all really important to attract and retain businesses and workers. So let's practice and let's look at a question. I'm going to let you read this and look carefully at the map here. Look carefully at this graph and read the question and think about what you think would be the best answer. Go ahead and put me on pause, and then when you're ready, unpause me. So let me put my glasses on here. So let's kind of deconstruct this question for a moment. We're going to read the prompt. It says the map shows major highways and the route of the Metrorail Silver Line around Tysons Corner, Virginia, and Edge City around Washington, D.C. Using the information shown in the map and the data table, which of the following was the most likely positive result of the opening of the Metro Rail Silver Line in 2014. So we're going to come over here and we are going to look at this map. We see the Metro Rail line, the Silver Line, and it's coming right around Tyson's Corner. And then let's look here, and we are going to look at the Metro Rail station, 2015, 2018. Can you see that the Metro Rail usage has gone up? Has it gone down? Well, it looks like in Tyson's Corner, it's gone up. So would A be really the right choice? I would think probably not. More vehicular traffic? I don't think so. More traffic on Chain Bride Road and Leesburg Pike? I don't think so. We can see that C is the correct answer, an increase in population and business activity as a result of the improved connectivity. That sounds pretty good. A decrease in population and business activity as a result, that doesn't really sound right. And a decrease in the number of shoppers at the Tyson Corner shopping malls, I would definitely say no to that. Not when there's a Metro Rail line station right here. So you should have been able to look at the map and look at the data in the chart and figured out that C was your best answer. Right, so infrastructure, public transportation. So what are some of the things that we should take away from this? Location quality of a city's infrastructure is really important to the patterns of economic and social development. Countries, regions of a country, and cities that lack access to decent infrastructure can lag in terms of both economic and social development. Well, I hope that you've learned a little bit about infrastructure today. Thank you very much for joining us and see you next time.